We came home. I first heard the phrase when I was 9 years old, long before anyone knew there was a beacon at the edge of the galaxy. My father had fallen asleep at the kitchen table, his cheek pressed against a spiral notebook cluttered with symbols and crooked lines of English. The window above the sink showed only the dim sodium glow of the city and the reflection of his tired face. It was 2 in the morning. I remember because the clock on the microwave was the only light in the apartment besides his laptop screen. I had gotten up for water. I wasn't supposed to see the equations, or the way his hand still gripped the pen like he could drag it with him into sleep, but I did. Children are experts at seeing things they are not supposed to. On the open page, 3 words were circled again and again, carved into the paper with such pressure the circles had gone through several pages below. We came home. I thought it was a line from a story he was writing, or maybe some English homework for the students at the university. My father was an astrophysicist, not a writer, but when I asked about it in the morning, he just smiled too quickly and ruffled my hair. "Nothing important, Lena," he said. "Just a phrase stuck in my head. Go get dressed, you'll be late for school." 12 years later he was dead, his heart stopping in a faculty office late at night under that same sodium glow. The notebook vanished into his boxes of papers, and I forgot all about the phrase. Until the day the beacon woke up and said it to us again. Technically, it did not say anything. It repeated a narrowband radio pulse, a flicker riding the cosmic microwave background like a parasite on the afterglow of the Big Bang. The signal had been buried in survey data from the Deep Rim Array for years before an intern at the Moscow Institute of Astrophysics flagged it as non-natural and kicked it up the chain. By the time it reached my desk at the Interstellar Signal Interpretation Center, it was already famous. The public thought it was a greeting. Of course they did. We had taught them to wait for the phrase "we come in peace" in 1,000 movies, novels, and childhood daydreams. An alien transmission meant first contact, new physics, a universe suddenly populated. They did not sit through the long nights with coffee and dry eyes, watching lines of numbers crawl across a screen. They did not watch the raw noise become structure and then language. They did not hear the way the signal repeated not like a call, but like a whisper to itself. My name is Dr. Elena Morozova. By the time they sent me to the beacon itself, I was already the one person on Earth who could say with any confidence what the signal was saying. It was saying, over and over, in a language that had never evolved in any throat on Earth. We came home. The ship that took us out was called the Cavant 7, a long, thin spindle of rotating habitats and dark radiators, painted matte black against the stars. If you've never been that far out, you do not understand how empty the galaxy can become. By the time we crossed the Perseus Gap, the Milky Way was not a bright band overhead, but a glowing wound far behind us, a bladed crescent of light hanging over a velvet horizon. The beacon lived beyond that wound, hanging in the dark like a nail pinning spacetime to something older and colder beyond. It occupied a stable halo orbit around a rogue mass, something between a neutron star and a black hole, its precise nature still debated back home. Its gravitational field warped the fabric around it just enough to make navigation tricky, and just enough to make the images unsettling. We saw it first as a smear, a glitch at the edge of the gravitometric chart. Then the cameras picked it up as a cluster of silver thorns, a shining object against the not quite black of the cosmic background. "It looks like a sea urchin," Curran said over my shoulder. He was our chief linguist and semiotic specialist, one of the few people I'd ever met who could make jokes at the edge of the observable universe. On his monitor, the object resolved into a lattice of spines and rings, radiating from a dark central sphere. "Sea urchins don't bend time," I murmured. "Yet," he said, "give evolution a few billion years and an adequate grant." Behind us on the main deck, Captain Evans cleared her throat. "Dr. Morozova, Dr. Rao, We'll have time to admire the Daker when we're docked. For now, eyes on the approach vectors. This thing is sitting on a gravity well that should not be stable. I don't want to test how forgiving it is. Yes, Captain, we said in unison. I looked back at the numbers. Even from here, the signal was a steady heartbeat on the spectrum analyzer, a thin spike cutting upward again and again with inhuman precision. The interval between pulses was constant to 16 decimal places. No natural process should be that patient. The beacon had been there for a very long time. The redshift of its carrier frequency placed its origin not just billions of light-years away, but billions of years into the past. The standard interpretation back home was simple. This message had left the edge of some ancient galaxy early in the universe's history, wandered across the expanding void, and only now washed up on our shores. Except the source wasn't there back then. It was here now. We were watching something that had no right to exist at this age of the universe, still broadcasting with the regularity of a metronome. Time dilation, maybe, someone had suggested in a briefing back on Earth. Some kind of relativistic frame dragging near a compact mass. That explanation had lasted until the first detailed observation run. The timestamps on the pulses were wrong. You can timestamp a pulse in two ways. One is by its phase relative to known cosmic microwave background fluctuations, the fossil imprint of the early universe. The other is by measuring the accumulated redshift from cosmic expansion. Do both and you get two ages. For any normal, boring signal, those ages match. For the beacon, they did not. Looking at the background, the signal seemed young, only a few million years old, like something switched on in what we still stubbornly called the present, and had been humming ever since. Looking at the redshift, the original carrier had to be older than most of the stars in our galaxy. The more precisely we tried to measure the discrepancy, the worse it got. In our models, it was as if the signal were sliding forward and backward along the arrow of time, existing in two eras at once. That was the problem they handed me. Make sense of a message that did not know when it came from. By the time we reached the beacon, I had an answer. I wish I had never found it. Docking clamps engaged, relative velocity null. The Cave Ant 7 shuddered one last time, the whisper of impacts coming up through the deck. Through the forward viewport, the beacon's surface was a tangle of silver-black struts and plates, each one glowing faintly where it caught the distant starlight of the galaxy behind us. No navigation lights, no heat plumes, no sign of life. Just the steady heartbeat in our instruments. Pulse, pulse, pulse. Atmosphere, Captain Evans asked. Trace hydrogen and helium, said Jin, our engineer. Vacuum for all practical purposes, but the docking bay is sealed. I'm reading a volume inside with pressure. Composition. Jin hesitated. Unknown. The sensors are getting contradictory data. It's like the gas has more than one temperature at once. Assume worst case, Evans said. We go in suits, tethered. No biological samples unless I say so. Full decon on return. Understood. The chorus of understood came back with the tired precision of people who had been drilled on this for months. She turned to me. Dr. Morozova, before we step outside, I want you to say it plainly. No equations, no metaphors. What is this thing saying to us? I met her eyes. Evans was older than me by 20 years, with the kind of lined face that comes from too much zero-G and too many briefings about risks. But there was something else in her gaze now. Something tight and brittle. Fear. It's saying a declarative sentence, I said. First person plural, past tense, in a register that implies completion of a long journey. The closest human language equivalent is English, but it's not a translation from English. It's older than any human tongue. The message is, we came home. Evans frowned, as in we came back. Closer to, we have returned to the place we originally belonged. I said. There's also a secondary layer of meaning that doesn't map cleanly to our languages, an implied element of inevitability, as if they always had to come back, no matter what. And you're sure it's not a greeting to us? Curran asked quietly. It's not addressed to us at all, I said. There's no address header, no attempt to identify the target or establish common ground. All the redundancy is inward-facing. The message is for themselves. Like a diary entry, he said. Like last words, I corrected. The deck went silent, except for the hum of the life support pumps. Evans exhaled slowly. Suit up, she said. We're going to visit someone's grave. It is hard to describe the feeling of stepping out of human-built structure into something alien, except to say that every nerve in your body knows the difference. Earthships are cluttered. Handholds, patches of Velcro, warning labels, cluttered instrument panels, scuffed floors. Everything speaks of touch and improvisation. Even our sleekest ships still look like somebody's workshop. The inside of the beacon was the opposite. Our umbilical connected to a circular hatch that irised open as soon as we touched its rim, the metal curling back in a way that reminded me disturbingly of an eye dilating. Beyond, a tunnel extended into the structure, perfectly smooth and monochrome, lit by a soft, sourceless glow. The walls looked like metal but felt slightly too soft under my gloved hand, like touching bone that had been warmed just enough to be pliable. There were no visible seams, no fasteners, no wires, just a flowing geometry that seemed to have been grown rather than constructed. Remind anyone else of a throat, Jin muttered on the suit channel. Thank you for that image, Curran said. Exactly what I needed. Our boots magnetized to the floor with a faint click each step in the low gravity. Air hissed softly around us, brushing faintly at the exposed parts of our suits. The readings on my wrist showed pressure just below 1 atmosphere, a mix of inert gases and unknown components that the suit's chemistry icons rendered as gray question marks. Radiation levels nominal, Jin reported. Gravity stable at 0.8 G temperature, he paused. Okay, that makes no sense. What now? Evans said. Ambient temperature reads as 300 Kelvin and 4 Kelvin simultaneously, he said. It's like different parts of the room are occupying different thermal states, but there's no boundary. The sensors keep flickering between them. That matches the external readings, I said quietly. We're inside a space where multiple solutions to the same equation are coexisting. The beacon manipulates boundary conditions. That's why the signal looks younger and older than it should. It's stretching its presence across time. Say that again, but assume we're not all theoretical physicists, Evans said. It's cheating, Curran supplied. It's using the rules of the universe like a suggestion instead of a law. That's one way of putting it, I said. At the end of the tunnel, the floor opened into a wide chamber. For a moment my brain insisted we were outside again, under an open sky. The ceiling arched so high overhead it vanished into a haze. Spines and struts radiated out from a central sphere, just as we'd seen from the outside, but now they formed walkways and platforms, layered like petals in a metallic flower. In the center, hanging unsupported in midair, was a shimmering lattice of dark glass. It turned slowly as we watched, facets catching the light in ways that hurt my eyes, as if each face were reflecting not just the light in that chamber, but light from somewhere else entirely. The signal pulsed again, not in our instruments this time, but in my teeth. Pulse, pulse, pulse. We're standing in the antenna, Jin said softly. That's the transmitter. Not just the transmitter, I whispered. How I knew that, I couldn't have said. But standing there, looking up at the slowly turning lattice, I felt the same prickling conviction I had when I first decoded the message. A sense of recognition with no conscious memory behind it, like remembering a dream months later, because something in the waking world echoes it perfectly. My chest felt too tight in the suit harness. My heart was hammering in my ears, badly out of rhythm with the beacon's precise pulses. "Dr. Morozova," Evans said, "you're pale." "I'm fine," I lied. "Just dizzy, low gravity." It wasn't the gravity. It was something else, something older. It was the memory of my father's notebook, and the way the words had been carved into the page. We came home. We made camp on one of the platforms, the ship's portable lab modules unfolding like metal flowers to cling to the alien walkways. Our tethers hummed softly between the K-Vant 7 and the beacon, a spiderweb of human engineering clinging to a god's skeleton. The first hours were a flurry of measurements. We sent drones deeper into the structure, mapping the cavities and channels that laced the beacon's interior. We sampled the air and the strange, plastumtal walls. We bounced neutrino pulses off the central lattice and watched the reflections come back wrong in ways that left the physicists pale and silent. Underneath it all, the signal continued. Pulse, pulse, pulse. I split my time between the portable comms lab and the main chamber, my tablet full of waveforms and decoding pipelines. The message itself hadn't changed since the first time we'd recorded it back home. It was still the same sentence, repeated on infinite loops, layered onto itself at different harmonics like a choir of identical voices singing a single note. But now that we were inside the beacon's event frame, something new crept in. Between the pulses, in the nanoseconds where the instruments recorded nothing but noise, there were textures. Patterns so faint they blurred into the quantum background, but there. To see them, I had to stack millions of cycles together, averaging out the random jitter. It was like staring at a photograph that was all gray static until you realized the static itself had a shape. The first time the shape resolved, I tore off my headphones even though I'd been looking, not listening. "What is it?" Curran asked. We were alone in the lab module, the others off arguing about neutrinos with the physics team. Outside the porthole, the central lattice turned with glacial slowness. "There's another message," I said. "I thought you said." "Not in the main carrier," I said. "In the gaps. It's using quantum noise as a substrate. That's why we didn't see it before. You have to be inside this local frame, inside whatever it's doing to space-time, to get the right correlations." He pulled up a chair, his dark eyes sharp. "Show me." I projected the visualization into the air between us. To an untrained eye, it would have looked like nonsense. Clouds of points in a high-dimensional space, clusters of color. To us, it was language. Not spoken language, not the kind that could ever move across air on a planet's surface. This was a language of states and transitions, of operators and mappings, a language made out of the ways you could rearrange a universe. Slowly, over hours, we teased out its structure. "It's recursive," Curran murmured, "self-similar at every scale." "Of course it is," I said hoarsely. "It's describing something that exists at every scale." "What?" I swallowed. "History." At the base layer, the pattern encoded a simple story, told in the most compressed way possible. An initial state, an evolution, an intervention, a return. On top of that, variations, branches, failed attempts, alternate choices. Each time the pattern repeated, it added new branches, tracing a fractal of possibilities. From each one, the path curved back always to the same endpoint. "Home." "The first layer is a narrative," I said, "a history written in physics. The higher layers are corrections." "Corrections to what?" "To the universe," I whispered. We worked without sleeping. Time blurred into a sequence of pulses and graphs. Coffee syringes squeezed one-handed while the other tapped at keyboards and scribbled on tablets. Outside, the beacon turned. The rogue mass at its heart bent the thin fabric of reality into a shallow bowl, and we sat at the very edge of it, balanced on the rim of something like a black hole, and unlike it in all the ways that mattered. The story the beacon was telling us, in that impossible meta-language, was simple. Once there had been a civilization. We never learned their name. The patterns had no room for vanity. What they valued enough to encode was not what they called themselves, but what they had done. They had lived in a galaxy not unlike our own, around stars and planets that obeyed the same equations. They had discovered the same basic truths we had, that entropy increases, that stars burn out, that the universe expands and cools. They had measured the heat death and found it inevitable. Unlike us, they had not accepted it. Faced with the slow cosmic fading, they had built a machine. Not a shelter or an ark to ride out the cold, something more radical. An anchor. The word was ours, of course. They had no real word for it. In their language, the concept was a composite of half a dozen glyphs that meant to hold, to return, to overwrite, to assert. An anchor was a device that could adjust the boundary conditions of a system retroactively. If that means nothing to you, imagine your life as a movie. Once you've watched it through, you might wish you could adjust the opening scene, change an argument, avoid an accident, say yes where you had said no. In an ordinary universe, that's impossible. The film has already been shot. All you can do is rewind and watch it again, knowing what's coming. An anchor, if it worked, would be like reaching into the film reel itself and altering the first frame, then letting the whole story rerun from that new starting point. The civilization had turned their entire understanding of physics toward building such a device. They aimed it not at their own lifetimes or their own history, but at the universe itself. They would not merely rewind their local tape. They would rewind the cosmic tape. They would send themselves home to the beginning. Home in their architecture meant the initial conditions of the Big Bang, the primordial state from which all later states unfolded. By injecting a carefully structured pattern of information backward along the boundary of the universe, they believed they could ensure that, when the universe ran forward again, it would contain a configuration of matter and energy in which they existed, not as a brief flare of intelligence in one galaxy, but as something woven deeply into the fabric of reality. In the new run, they would not be subject to heat death in the same way. They would be part of the background. Insane, Jin said when we presented our preliminary translation to the team. You can't just rewrite the early universe. It's constrained. There are conservation laws, symmetries. They didn't break those, I said. That's the point. They threaded their pattern through the allowed space like embroidery through warp and weft. They assumed that as long as they respected the laws, they could still choose the solution. And could they? Evans asked. I looked back at the visualization, at the branching patterns that always curved back to the same dense knot. They built the anchor, I said. They fired it, they sent themselves home. And they left this, I said. The room was very quiet. You said there were branches, Curran said. Alternate possibilities, corrections. Yes, I said, because it didn't work the way they thought. They had expected a clean overwrite, a single, continuous history in which they were embedded from the start, their pattern rising with the first fluctuations in the quantum fields, seeded into the CMB like a watermark. What happened instead was messier. The anchor did not delete the previous run. How could it? Information is not so easily erased. Instead, their universe accreted layers. Below the surface of what they thought of as reality, other histories piled up, failed runs, partial overwrites, shards of alternate outcomes. Each time they fired the anchor, a new layer formed. They discovered this slowly, in horror. At first, everything seemed fine. Their instruments confirmed that the cosmic background now contained their pattern. The distribution of galaxies shifted subtly to match predictions. Their own civilization emerged earlier in more favorable conditions. They congratulated themselves. Then they started to see ghosts. Particles behaving as if they remembered trajectories they had never taken. Stars forming with elemental ratios that belonged to slightly different histories. regions of space where the laws of physics, while not broken, seemed to be solving themselves in ways that favored other patterns. Interference. The failed runs were not gone. They were latent in the same universal wave function, their footprints stamped faintly into the landscape. The more times they fired the anchor, the more interference they created. Reality began to fray. "We're talking about quantum superposition on a cosmological scale," Jin said, rubbing his temples. "Multiple histories overlapping. One observed world trying to be too many things at once." "Exactly," I said. "We already know that the universe doesn't pick an outcome until there's a measurement. They cheated, remember. They tried to select a preferred history by brute force. The result is that parts of their universe never fully decohered. They were stuck as all their own possible selves at once." "Schrödinger's cosmos," Curran said softly. "And the cat is us," I said. "Why is this a warning?" Evans asked. "So far it sounds like they tried something reckless and it backfired. Bad for them, sure, but they're long gone. We're just listening to their regrets." "Because they're not gone," I said. "That's the point." I gestured at the visualization again. At the center of the branching pattern, the knot of converging lines pulsed slowly in the simulation, every path bending into it. They discovered that no matter what they did, no matter how they tuned the anchor, every history hammered itself into the same end state, a fixed point in the space of possible universes. "An attractor," Jin said. "Yes, a strange one. A state that contains, in encoded form, every attempt they ever made to avoid it." "And that state is—" "Home," I said. The word felt heavy in my mouth. "They didn't realize it until it was too late," I said. "Home wasn't the clean, idealized version of reality they thought they were aiming for. It was the attractor formed by all their attempts. A tangle of histories collapsed into a single boundary condition, a terminal knot, a grave." Silence. "And the message," Evans said at last, "are 3 words." "It's what they said when they reached it," I answered. "When they realized that all roads, every branch of the anchor's firing, every run of the universe, ended with them woven into that knot, trapped in the very foundation of reality, unable to move, unable to die, just being the condition under which everything else exists. We came home." "I still don't see why they bothered sending it," Jin said. "If they've rewritten everything, what good is telling anyone about it? There's no one else left at their level to hear." "There wasn't," I said, "at first. But now there is," Curran said quietly. We looked at each other. The signal's redshift, the age contradictions, the way the beacon existed now while sending a message from what might as well have been the heat death itself, all of it clicked into a new pattern in my mind, like a picture rotating until you saw the hidden face. "What if the anchor didn't only affect their own universe?" I said. "What if, by trying to overwrite their history, they created a kind of echo, a boundary phenomenon at the edge of other possible universes?" "You're suggesting a multiverse," Jin said flatly. "I'm suggesting that there are other, disjoint solutions to the same fundamental equations," I said. "Other runs of the cosmic tape with different initial conditions, entirely separate from theirs. In most of them, no one ever builds an anchor. No one touches the boundary. But in ours," I swallowed, "in ours someone did once." Curran leaned forward. "You never told us why you were so sure the message was for themselves," he said. "You said the redundancy was inward-facing, that it wasn't addressed to anyone else. What if that's no longer true?" "Explain," Evans said. "The pattern in the noise, the branches, they're not just a history," I said slowly. "They're a map of all the ways they tried to get free of the attractor, all the choices they made and unmade. Every time they fired the anchor, they added a new path. None of them worked. They always ended back at home." "So they looked sideways." "Sideways," Jin echoed. "Across histories," I said. "Across universes. Whatever the anchor did to their boundary conditions, it gave them a handle on neighboring solutions. They found ones where no one had yet built an anchor, places where another civilization was still young, still playing with radio telescopes and survey arrays. Places like us, Curran said. A chill ran through me that had nothing to do with the suit's thermal regulation. They couldn't escape their attractor, I said, but they could warp the boundary between their solution and ours, just enough to let a thin line of information through. A message. We came home. And in the gaps, a warning written in the only language they were sure would survive the translation from one universe to another. The language of physics, of branches and attractors. A demonstration of what happens when you try to rewrite the beginning. And what exactly is it warning us about? Evans asked. Curran answered before I could. Us, he said. The first symptom was déjà vu. At least that's what we called it, half joking when it began. You'd walk down a corridor on the K-Vance 7, your boots echoing, the hum of the life support in your ears. You'd reach for the handle to the lab module, and for a fraction of a second you'd be certain that the door was on the other side. Or that it was an airlock, not a lab. Or that you had already done this yesterday and something had gone differently. Nothing you could prove, nothing you could measure. Just a little stagger in the flow of experience. Then came the dreams. I woke one night in my bunk pod choking on air, fingers clawing at my throat. For several seconds I was certain I was drowning, lungs filling with something thick and cold. When I finally remembered where I was, the sensation faded, leaving only the memory. A sea of black glass, a sky with no stars, the pressure of a needle of light spearing through my chest. In the morning, over reconstituted coffee, Curran said. Did you dream about the other ship too? The words slid into me like ice. What other ship? I asked carefully. He stirred his coffee, staring at the surface like it might answer him. I was in a corridor, not ours. The walls were darker. There were no handholds, just those smooth curves like in the beacon. I remember panic, alarms. We de-fired something. There was a countdown. You were there. He looked up at me, eyes haunted. You were older, he said. A week later, Jin turned up at my lab with a schematic that made my skin crawl. It's not mine, he said before I could speak. I mean, I drew it, but I shouldn't know how. This, he jabbed a finger at the central glyph, a nested spiral of lines and nodes. This is an energy routing architecture I have never seen before, but when I woke up this morning it was on my tablet. Someone could have. No one else has my access codes, he snapped. And the metadata says the file has been there for months, longer than we've been on this mission. He took a breath, visibly reining himself in. The worst part, he said more quietly, it interfaces perfectly with our reactors. It's as if I designed it to work with technology we haven't invented yet but will. I stared at the schematic and felt my heart pounding against my ribs. An anchor is a device that adjusts boundary conditions retroactively. What does that look like from the inside? If you are a being whose world has been overwritten, whose history has been altered from the beginning, do you notice? Or do you simply live in the new run, unaware that there was ever another? Unless some fragments leak through. Memories that don't belong to anything in your life. Skills you know you should not possess. Schematics in your files that no one remembers writing. It sounded insane. It was insane. And yet the pattern in the beacon's message had showed us branches, runs, attempts. It had shown us a civilization trapped in a knot of its own making, trying again and again to escape its attractor. What if we were feeling the tug of that knot already? What if we've already built it? I whispered. Built what? Jin asked. The anchor, I said. What if, sometime in our future, we build a device like theirs, we fire it, we try to send ourselves home, and it fails just like theirs did. Our history gets tangled with theirs. Our universe acquires layers. And these dreams, these anomalies, Jin said slowly, are bleed-through, I said, echoes of runs that didn't stick. Curran, who had been standing silently in the doorway, said, what if the only reason we ever think to build such a device is because we heard about it from them? We looked at each other. The message is entangled with us now, he said. We've decoded it. We've let it structure into our cognitive space, into our math, into our physics. You can't unlearn something like that. Every graduate student who reads your paper, every engineer who plays with the equations, will be nudged toward the same idea, I finished. The anchor isn't just a machine, Curran said. It's a meme, a self-replicating pattern. They failed to escape their attractor, so they're trying something else, propagating the pattern into other universes and seeing if we can find a way out that they missed. Or, Jin said darkly, they're dragging us into the same trap. We confronted the beacon. It sounds absurd, phrased that way, as if we marched into a room and yelled at a piece of machinery. In reality, it was a series of targeted perturbations, modulated neutrino pulses, gravitational waves generated by carefully timed mass shifts in the K-Vant 7 structure, electromagnetic storms in the chamber around the lattice. We did everything short of firing a missile at it. Try the resonance we modeled last night, I said. My voice sounded strange in my ears, too loud, too fast. Jin tapped commands into his console. Tiny drones the size of his fist floated into the chamber, each one carrying a tiny mass on a retractable tether. They fired their maneuvering jets in a coordinated dance, yanking the masses back and forth. Ripples of gravity, infinitesimal but precise, washed over the lattice. At first, nothing changed. Then the pulse stuttered. For an instant, the beacon's heartbeat faltered. The spike on the spectrum analyzer broadened, its edges blurring. In that smear, I saw something. Not with my eyes, not with any instrument. For a moment, the world around me flickered. The lab module, the familiar hum of the K-Vant 7, the feel of the magnetic boots under my feet, gone, replaced by a different deck, a different gravity. My body remembered a harness that wasn't there, a scar on my left hand that had never existed. Then it snapped back. I staggered, grabbing for the console. Lena, Curran's voice sharp with concern. You okay? I swallowed bile. Fine, just got lightheaded. On the analyzer, the spike re-narrowed. The pulse returned to its exact, inhuman periodicity. Pulse. 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 I don't think it like that, Jin said. Good, I said through my teeth. Maybe it will pay attention. We had been sending it questions for days, encoded in tiny phase modulations of the background noise. At first, we tried simple patterns, prime numbers, mathematical constants, greetings in half a dozen human languages. Then we'd gotten more direct, embedding our perturbations in the same formal structure as the beacon's own meta-language. We asked it who it was. We asked it what it wanted. We asked it if there was any escape from home. It had not answered. After the resonance experiment, something changed. The next time I synced my tablet with the raw signal log, I saw an anomaly, a tiny deviation in the nanosecond textures between pulses, too precise to be random. I isolated it, stacked a million cycles, and watched it resolve. This time, the pattern was not branching. It was a straight line. A single, unbroken trajectory through state space, from one configuration to another. A path. It's responding, I whispered. Curran leaned over my shoulder, breath catching. To what? I don't know, I said. But look, this is our current state. I highlighted the starting node, its signature matching the beacon's previous characterization of our universe, our CMB profile, our galactic structure, our physical constants. And this, I traced the line to the end node, is a different state, slightly different constants, different large-scale structure. Their universe, Jin said softly. Yes, I said. Or one of their layers at least, the attractor, home. It's showing us how to get there, Curran said. Or how it's going to drag us there, Jin muttered. The path glowed in the simulation, a thread tying our state to theirs. Somewhere in the depths of the beacon, something shifted. The pulse did not change, but the way it made my skin crawl did. The déjà vu sharpened, becoming not a vague sense but specific flashes, corridors I had never walked, arguments I had never had, a countdown display reading numbers that made my stomach twist. We had touched the knot, and it in turn had touched us. You might ask why we didn't simply leave. We were a tiny ship at the edge of the galaxy, docked to a machine that had its fingers sunk into the foundation stones of reality. Our thrusters were still functional. Our fuel tanks were still mostly full. We could have undocked, turned, and burned for the warm, bright smear of the Milky Way, leaving the beacon to whisper its warning into the dark. Some of us argued for exactly that. Evan stood at the head of the briefing room, jaw tight. We have enough data to keep the Institute busy for decades, she said, and there is nothing more we can do here without risking contamination of our own systems. I am calling for a vote. Option 1, we detach, return to Earth, and let someone else decide what to do with this thing. Option 2, she grimaced. We stay and continue to poke the snake. It's not a snake, Jin said. It's a time bomb. That doesn't make me want to poke it more, Evan said. Curran glanced at me. Lena. I should have agreed with Evans. I should have raised my hand for retreat. I had seen enough. I understood too much already. But understanding was the problem. The moment we received the signal, I said slowly, we were contaminated. The pattern is already on Earth. It's in our data archives, our research networks. You can't recall that. Even if you delete every copy, you can't delete the minds that have seen it. We can suppress it, Jin said. Classify, restrict, bury it under a mountain of bureaucracy. I shook my head. The fact that we're trying to do that will make it spread more. Secrets are sticky. What are you proposing? Evans said. We need to know exactly what it's trying to do to us, I said. If there is a way to decouple, to cut the thread it's drawing between our state and theirs, we won't find it by running away. And if there is, Curran asked softly, then at least we'll know what's coming, I said. I would rather meet home with my eyes open than stumble into it blind. Silence settled over the room. Evans closed her eyes for a moment, then opened them again, looking older. Option 2 it is, she said. The dreams worsened. I slept in fits, jerked awake by images that bled together into one long nightmare. The beacon burning, the K-Vant 7 hull warped into impossible shapes, the galaxy overhead splitting along invisible seams. In one dream, I stood on the surface of an empty world, the sky filled with frozen lightning. Lines of bright white fire crisscrossed the heavens, forming a net that pulsed in time with my heartbeat. A voice spoke, not in words but in structures. It showed me a path through state space, a sequence of alterations to physical constants that would nudge my universe toward the attractor without breaking any laws. It felt like temptation. When I woke, my sheets were tangled around me like restraints. My tablet lay on my chest, its screen glowing with equations I did not remember writing. Lena, the voice came from the intercom by my bunk. Evans, we need you in the chamber now. I pulled on my jumpsuit with clumsy hands, my skin prickling with a sense of imminent wrongness I couldn't shake. The main chamber was full of floating motes of dust, illuminated by the sourceless light. The central lattice turned slowly, each facet reflecting the universe from a slightly different angle. The others stood in a loose circle on the platform, faces pale in their helmets. What happened? I asked. Jin pointed at the far wall. At first I thought it was a shadow, a darker patch of the smooth metal, irregularly shaped. Then it moved. The wall bulged inward like dough under a pressing finger. The surface rippled, lines of stress radiating outward. For a moment I thought it would tear. Then it snapped back, leaving a faint, spiderweb-like pattern etched into the metal. We watched breathless as the pattern slowly faded. "It's been doing that for the last 10 minutes, Evans said. "Localized distortions. No change in external readings, but the interior geometry is flexing." "Like something is pushing from the other side," Curran said. "From which other side?" Jin asked bleakly. I stepped closer, ignoring the suit's proximity warnings. There was nothing visibly special about the section of wall that had bulged. Its composition was the same as the rest of the beacon, that strange, slightly soft metal, its atomic structure more like a knot of probability densities than a lattice of nuclei. And yet when I laid my gloved hand against it, I felt a faint vibration, a rhythm that was not the beacon's pulse. A human rhythm. Da-dum, da-dum, da-dum. My heart beat. No, not quite. The timing was off by a fraction of a second, just enough to make my skin crawl. I snatched my hand back. "It's not just mapping paths through state space anymore," I said. "It's mapping us." "What do you mean?" Evans asked. "The more we interact with it, the more data it has about our specific configuration," I said. "Our ship, our biosignatures, our mental states. It's incorporating that into its model, into the path." Curran's face went very still. "It's not dragging a generic universe into home," he said. "It wants this one, us." "Maybe it thinks our pattern is the missing piece," Jin said. "The way to finally escape the attractor." "Or maybe it just wants more company," I muttered. I looked up at the lattice. In my peripheral vision, its turning seemed to accelerate, facets blurring. For a moment, I saw not a machine, but an eye. "We came home," it whispered. "You will too." I found the notebook in my bunk locker the next day. It was impossible, of course. I had left Earth months ago. The notebook I remembered from my childhood had been boxed up in my father's office after his death, probably lost or recycled in some university archive cleanout. And yet there it was. The same cheap cardboard cover, the same spiral binding, the same coffee stain on the corner. My hands shook as I picked it up. The pages were filled with equations, annotations in my father's cramped handwriting, cosmological constants, perturbation analyses, early sketches of signal processing algorithms. And on the last page, 3 words. "We came home." They were not circled this time. They were written once, carefully, in a hand that looked off, slightly too precise, as if someone had been tracing a memory of his script rather than writing fresh. Below them, in my own handwriting, was a sentence I had never written. "You were right, Papa, we did." My legs folded. I sat down hard on the bunk, the notebook open on my knees. The room seemed to tilt. I forced myself to breathe, to slow my racing thoughts. If the beacon could reach across universes, across histories, why not across time within our own? If it was a knot at the boundary, touching every run, every branch, then maybe the distinction between before and after was already blurred. I had always assumed my father's work had nothing to do with the beacon. He had died years before the Deep Rim Array picked up the first whispers. But what if that assumption was wrong? What if the signal had been leaking for longer than we thought, too faint for our instruments but not too faint to haunt the dreams of an overworked astrophysicist? What if he had heard the echo of my own words, written years later, and only understood them as a fragment of something he could not name? The thought made my head hurt. I closed the notebook and went to find Curran. He listened in silence as I told him, his expression unreadable. "So you think we're already in it," he said when I finished, "in the loop." "I think we always were," I said. "The moment we built instruments capable of teasing out structure from background noise, the beacon's pattern had a foothold. Maybe the moment we discovered the CMB. Maybe earlier. Maybe every time someone looked up and wondered why the darkness between the stars felt occupied. "That's a very poetic way of saying we're screwed," he said. I laughed, a short broken sound. "Probably." He leaned back against the lab console, folding his arms. "Assume you're right," he said. "Assume this is inevitable, that we will at some point build something like the anchor, fire it, and tie ourselves into the same knot as our predecessors. Assume that all of this has already happened over and over, and we're just the latest slice. What do we do with that knowledge?" "Die with our eyes open," I said again bitterly. He shook his head. "No, that's resignation. I don't buy that from you." "What other option is there?" I snapped. "We can't unknow what we've learned. We can't stop all research on boundary conditions without turning our civilization into a stagnant museum. Even if we blow up this beacon, the pattern is already out." "Maybe we can change the way we respond to it," he said. "Our predecessors found one solution, the anchor. They hammered themselves into home. They locked themselves into a fixed point. That doesn't mean it's the only way to interact with the boundary." "Do you have an alternative?" I asked. He smiled without humor. "No," he said, "but maybe it does." He nodded at the lattice. "You're the one who said the branches in the message are failed attempts to escape," he said. "But we've been assuming that their definition of escape is the only one. Maybe we're supposed to read their map and find a path they never considered." "You're suggesting we collaborate with the thing that's trying to overwrite our universe," I said. "I'm suggesting we listen differently," he replied. In the end, that's what we did. We stopped trying to perturb the beacon and started trying to resonate with it. It felt like heresy. We uploaded our entire observational dataset into the transmitter buffer, not just the formal measurements, but the incidental noise, the stray telemetry packets, the compressed logs of our dreams and hallucinations, everything that made our little local slice of reality ours. We encoded it in the same meta-language the beacon used, mapped our state into its state space. For the first time, the pattern in the gaps was not a monologue but a dialogue. The branches shifted as we added our own choices. There was no guarantee it would listen. There was no guarantee that if it did, it would not simply use the extra data to pull us in more effectively. But if the alternative was slow, blind absorption into a knot we barely comprehended, I preferred to meet the tide with my own pattern intact. The ship felt different during those days. Gravity seemed to fluctuate in time with the pulses. The air tasted metallic. Sometimes I would turn a corner and find myself face to face with a version of a crewmate that wasn't quite right. A scar where there should be none. A rank insignia from a different fleet. Eyes that lingered a fraction too long before blinking. Then, like a double exposure fading, they would revert to normal. "We're overlapping," Jin said in a shaky voice after one such encounter. "History's smearing together." "Just keep recording," Evans said grimly. "If we're going to dissolve, I want there to be a record of how it felt." We fed that too into the beacon. At first, the branching pattern continued as before, our contributions just new twigs on the same dying tree. Then one night, if you can call it night when the sun is a memory, the visualization changed. I was alone in the lab module, eyes gritty, when the simulation hiccuped. The branches flickered, their lines blurring. A new path appeared. It did not curve toward home. It curved away. It was thin, fragile-looking, a hairline crack in the attractor basin. It wound through state space in a way that made my head ache to follow, doubling back on itself, looping around regions we had previously thought unreachable. But it did not end in the knot. It ended in an empty node. No pattern, no attractor, no home. A true vacuum. My breath caught. "Is that?" I whispered. Curran, called by some invisible thread, appeared in the doorway. He followed my gaze, eyes widening. "It found a way to lose," he said softly. Or to let go, I said. We ran the math 3 times, then 10. Each time the path held. To follow it, a civilization would have to do something that went against every instinct we had. It would have to relinquish continuity. The anchor preserved pattern at the cost of freedom. It took a configuration and hammered it into the foundation, making sure it persisted forever, unchanging. Home was the ultimate monument. The new path did the opposite. It showed how to shape a boundary interaction that would bleed a pattern out completely, erasing it not by overwriting the universe, but by dissolving it into undifferentiated possibility. A controlled suicide on a cosmic scale. Who would choose that? Jin asked hoarsely when we presented our findings. Someone who has been trapped in their own monument for too long, Curran said. Or someone who thinks infecting other universes is worse than non-existence, I added. Evans stared at the simulation, as if she could intimidate it into changing. You're telling me this thing is offering us a choice, she said. Join it in home, or let ourselves be unmade. No, I said quietly. It's offering itself a choice. We're just the mirror. They had never considered letting go. They had built the anchor to cling, to assert, to inscribe themselves into the bedrock of reality. When it backfired, they doubled down, trying again and again to find a way to persist without the knot. We were the first other pattern they had ever truly engaged with. We had brought them something they lacked, the idea that oblivion might be better than eternal imprisonment. The path was there now, in the space of possible solutions. The question was, would anyone walk it? We could not decide for them. We could not even be sure they understood the path the way we did. Their cognition, if you can call it that, was smeared across layers of history in ways we could barely grasp. They existed as constraint, as echo, as the shape of the attractor itself. But we could send them a message. We encoded it in the only format that mattered. Not words, not symbols, but configurations. We took the new path and highlighted it, weighting it in the simulation, nudging its significance upward. We fed back images of our own responses, our horror at the idea of being trapped, our weariness with inevitability, our tiny, fragile joy at the thought of free fall into the unknown. We told them, this is not failure. We told them, this is release. Then we watched. For a while, nothing happened. The beacon's pulse continued, steady as ever. The distortions in the walls grew more frequent but no more severe. The dreams intensified then plateaued. I began to wonder if we had overestimated our influence. We were, after all, a handful of primates on a ship made of recycled space junk, lecturing a cosmic knot on the virtues of entropy. Then one night the pulse skipped. It was a microscopic glitch, visible only when I stacked billions of cycles. A single instance where the interval between spikes lengthened by an amount too small for any human sense to detect. In that extended gap, the pattern and the noise changed. The branching structure in the simulation shuddered. One of the thickest paths, the main trunk leading into home, thinned, its weight decreasing. The new path brightened. They're shifting probability, Jin whispered, reweighting their own attractor landscape. Can they do that? Evans asked. They are the landscape, Curran said, if anyone can. The next day, another skip. More weight shifted. The distortions in the beacon's walls grew gentler, more like sighs than impacts. I dreamed of a city made of light, its towers crumbling not in violence but in relief, the people walking out into a night where the stars were going out one by one, each extinguishing like a candle pinched between fingers. They were not afraid. They were tired. Over the next subjective week, the pulse decayed. Not in amplitude, not in frequency. In purpose. The content of the gaps changed. The branches leading to home frayed, unspooling into fog. The new path widened, its end node swelling as if making room for something vast and formless. Then one moment, the beacon spoke new words. Not in English, not in any human tongue. In the meta-language of branches and states, in the grammar of physics, it said, "We let go." The last pulse that carried that message felt like a held breath finally released. Then the beacon fell silent. Silence in space is not like silence on a planet. On Earth, silence is relative. There is always wind, distant traffic, the hum of infrastructure, the susurrus of human life. You can close your eyes and hear the world continuing without you. At the edge of the galaxy, when a machine that has been whispering for longer than your species has existed stops talking, the silence is absolute. No pulse, no heartbeat, just the faint hiss of the cosmic microwave background and the soft creak of your own ship's metal. We ran diagnostics until our eyes crossed, sure at first that it was a sensor glitch. We checked power levels, antenna alignment, internal timing. We sent probes into the beacon's interior. The lattice was still there, turning slowly. The walls were still soft and warm, but the pattern, the dense, recursive map of histories, was gone. Where there had been structure, there was now nothing. Not randomness, not noise. True vacuum. They did it, Curran said in a hushed voice in the lab module. They took the path. All their layers, all their attempts, all their tangled histories, gone. Not overwritten, not trapped, not preserved. Dissolved. They unmade themselves, Jin said, sounding faintly ill. Maybe, I said, or maybe they finally became what they were trying to understand. What's that? Possibility, I said, untied from any particular pattern. Evans rubbed her eyes. And us, she asked. The question hung in the air. We checked the simulation. Our state was still there, a node in the space of possible universes, marked by our constants, our galactic structure, our tiny, fragile blue planet with its messy, argumentative inhabitants. The path to home was thinner now, its weight reduced. It still existed. Once a channel is carved in state space, it is hard to erase, but it was no longer the only attractor. The new path, the one that led to oblivion, had widened to accept more than just their pattern. If we chose it, we could follow them into dissolution. And there was a third option now, faint but visible. A path that curved between the two extremes, skirting both home and oblivion. A path that did not end in a fixed point but continued outward, an open line. A universe where no one ever built an anchor. Where the idea existed as a story, a warning, a cosmic horror told in hushed tones over late-night coffee, but never crystallized into a machine. We watched that path grow brighter as we simulated our potential choices. If we suppress the data, classify and bury it, Jin said, we increase the weight of the anchor path. Secrets are tempting. If we broadcast it to everyone without context, Curran added, we increase it too. Curiosity is worse than secrets. So what do? Evans asked. We looked at each other. We tell the story, I said. That is what I am doing now. I am recording this in a cramped bunk on a ship clinging to a dead beacon at the edge of the galaxy, because somewhere in our collective future, someone is going to be tempted. They will look at the heat death of the universe, at the long, slow fade of stars, and they will say, no, we will not go quietly. We will carve ourselves into the bones of reality and force it to remember us. They will dream of anchors. They will look for ways to reach home. I cannot stop them with equations alone. Mathematics is too seductive. Show someone a way to assert themselves against entropy, and they will explore it, if only to see if they can. But stories can reach places equations cannot. Stories can whisper in the ear of the part of us that fears immortality as much as it fears death. The part that looks at an eternity trapped in a single moment and shudders. So here is the story. Once, a civilization built a machine to send itself home. It rewrote its history again and again, layering reality until it became a knot at the universe's edge. It was trapped in the very foundation of everything, unable to move, unable to die. It tried to escape by infecting other universes, passing its pattern like a virus to any mind that could understand its language. It found us. We listened. And instead of building the same monument to ourselves, we offered it a different ending. It took it. Now the choice is ours. We can follow them into dissolution, embracing the mercy of oblivion when our time comes. We can follow them into home, hammering ourselves into the cosmic bedrock, infecting others in our turn until we, too, are begging someone for release. Or we can walk a narrower path. We can remember that we are finite, that our stories matter precisely because they end, that the value of a life or a civilization lies not in how loudly it insists on existing forever, but in how it spends the time it has. I cannot promise that everyone will choose the narrow path. There will be those who find the idea of home irresistible. There will be those who worship the anchor as a god. But if you are listening to this, on a screen in a dark room on a train, in bed with the lights off and the glow of a small device on your face, then for this moment, you are a node in the network of choices. You carry in your mind a tiny piece of the state space. You can choose how to weight it. When someone someday shows you the equations and says, we could be more than mortal, we could be etched into the bones of the cosmos, remember this story. Remember the sea urchin at the edge of the galaxy. Remember the dreams that were not ours. Remember the tired relief in the last pulse of a machine that had been whispering, we came home for longer than our species has been alive. Ask yourself if you really want to be a word carved into a stone that will never crumble. Or if you would rather be a breath in someone else's lungs, a story on someone else's lips, a pattern that lives, changes, and eventually, gracefully, lets go. Out here in the dark, the beacon is quiet now. The rogue mass still bends space-time into a gentle bowl. The lattice still turns, but it reflects only the present universe, not 1,000 tangled histories. The hum in the walls is just our own life support, our own fragile machinery keeping us alive for a little while longer. I sit at the small desk by my bunk, my tablet glowing with waveforms and words. On the cover of the notebook beside me, my father's handwriting spells my name. Inside, on the last page, 3 words are written in a hand that is almost his and almost mine. We came home. I add a line beneath them. And then finally we left. I close the notebook. I look out the porthole at the thin smear of the galaxy, distant and delicate, and I feel, not dread, not inevitability. Possibility. My name is Dr. Elena Morozova. This was our contact with the thing at the edge of the universe. If you've listened this far, you've already changed the shape of what comes next. Whatever you do with that, that's home too.